Okay, let's unpack this. Another official government report just dropped, this time from the Pentagon's ARO office.
Right, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office.
Exactly, and the headline is probably familiar to you listening.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't found evidence of aliens related to UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena.
That's right. This report, it came out in March of 2024,
Mm-hmm.
and it stated pretty clearly that, after reviewing historical and current cases, they, quote, not discovered any empirical evidence that any sighting of a UAP represented off-world technology.
Okay, so no off-world tech. What about secret programs?
Also denied.
Right.
Or rather, they found no evidence of the existence of a classified program that had not been properly reported to Congress.
So the official line is, once again, no aliens, no hidden super-secret government programs about aliens being kept off the books.
That's the official stance, yes.
But here's where it gets really interesting, based on the sources we've been looking at. Because despite these official denials, the belief in a government cover-up about UFOs or UAPs, it persists incredibly strongly for many people.
He really does.
And our sources suggest the government itself might be a key part of why that belief is so deeply ingrained.
Just maybe not in the way most people imagine.
Right. Not necessarily hiding little green men.
Exactly. We've been diving into these recent articles and investigations, and they zero in on this very paradox. They reveal a surprising, multi-decade history of direct government activity that's deeply intertwined with the whole UFO phenomenon.
So our mission in this deep dive is really to pull out the most important insights from these sources. We want to understand the surprising, maybe sometimes deliberate, reasons behind this persistent belief that the government is hiding something big related to UAPs.
And these sources make a strong case for what the government actually has been hiding.
Okay, so let's lay it out. You have the current official stance from AARO. No empirical evidence of off-world tech, no unreported alien-related programs.
That's the baseline from the recent report.
But standing against that, you have these powerful counterclaims. Claims that have captured huge public attention.
Like those from David Grusch, yeah.
The former intelligence official, he spoke very publicly about a decades-long conspiracy.
Right, and secret government programs allegedly retrieving and even back-engineering non-human craft.
That's a narrative a lot of people find incredibly compelling. It fits the mystery.
And that's the core puzzle these sources are really trying to tackle.
If the latest official reports deny alien encounters, deny secret alien tech programs, why do so many people still firmly believe the government is hiding something significant?
And the sources argue it points not necessarily towards aliens, but towards a long history of genuine government secrets. Absolutely.
Okay.
But crucially, also specific, deliberate government actions that have actively, built this belief over time.
Actively built it. That's a key difference.
It is. Not just letting myths grow, but potentially cultivating them.
So to really get a handle on this, our sources introduce us to different people who've investigated this space. First, there's journalist Leslie Kean.
Right. She co-authored some of the articles that first brought David Grusch's claims into the mainstream, like in the debrief.
And she talks about how she got hooked herself, right, way back in 1999.
Yeah, after seeing a French military report. Apparently, it featured retired generals claiming they'd seen, quote, craft from somewhere else. That got her attention.
And where does she stand now, according to the sources? Still open to extraterrestrials.
The sources suggest she remains open to the idea that some sightings could be extraterrestrial.
Okay.
Though she also acknowledges, some could definitely be terrestrial military projects. She's discussed the possibility of reverse engineering retrieved objects as something worth looking into.
Right, the whole crash retrieval idea.
Exactly.
Then on what's presented as a very different side of the argument, you have Mark Pilkington,
author of Mirage Men.
And what's really fascinating is Pilkington actually had his own sighting. He saw something himself.
Yeah, he describes seeing a perfect silvery reflective sphere in Yosemite, of all places.
But despite that personal experience, his conclusion is quite different.
Very different. After a lot of research, he concludes most UFOs are actually glimpses of clandestine terrestrial government projects.
Studies like
experimental drones, early stealth aircraft, that sort of thing. Stuff the government absolutely wouldn't want adversaries or even the public to know about.
And his key theory goes even further, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's pretty stark. Pilkington argues the U.S. government hasn't just passively benefited from UFO confusion. He thinks they've actively stoked popular belief in UFOs.
Stoked it. As in, Encouraged it.
Yes, as a deliberate tool for manipulation.
Yeah.
He believes they use disinformation campaigns, agents he calls Mirage Men, specifically to create a cover story for their real secrets.
So using the idea of aliens to hide spy planes or something.
Pretty much. He calls UFOs weapons of mass deception. It's a strong claim.
That's a huge difference in perspective from Kean. And the sources also note Pilkington's view on David Grusch's specific claims.
Yes, he's quoted as being very skeptical, calling them just trash and saying they're based on old recycled material with no revelations in anything that he said.
Wow, okay,
Yeah.
so no middle ground there.
Doesn't seem like it based on those quotes. So
Yeah.
you've got Kean keeping the door open to potential ET craft and retrieval programs.
And Pilkington convinced it's mostly terrestrial tech hidden behind a deliberately manufactured alien mythology.
And having these differing views from people who've really dug into this stuff themselves just highlights how complex this whole landscape is.
Yeah, and how wide open it is to conflicting interpretations, even among researchers.
Definitely.
Now, this is where the most recent findings reported from that HERO investigation you mentioned earlier,
The Pentagon one, yeah.
particularly the details reported in the Wall Street Journal, they add some really compelling new evidence.
And it seems to strongly support Pilkington's core idea about deliberate government action, doesn't it?
It really does. What's fascinating here is the investigation didn't just find, that the government had secrets that people mistook for UFOs. That's kind of the old explanation.
Right. This goes further. The sources reveal evidence that the Pentagon itself sometimes fabricated evidence of alien technology.
Fabricated it, made it up.
And allowed rumors to fester, specifically to distract from real secret weapons programs. So this wasn't passive. It sounds like they were actively creating elements of the mythology.
Actively sowing the seeds.
That's the implication, yeah.
And the sources provide some incredible specific examples uncovered by these investigators.
They do. Really concrete stuff.
Like the Area 51 smokescreen. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. The sources detail how, back in the 1980s, an Air Force colonel deliberately gave doctored photos.
Doctored photos.
Yeah, photos that look like flying saucers to a bar owner near Area 51. The photos went up on the wall, became famous locally.
And that just fueled the whole Area 51 alien legend.
Exactly, it solidified it. But the colonel later confessed to investigators just last year in 2023, apparently.
He confessed.
Yes, that this was a calculated act of disinformation. The whole point, the ruse, was meant to protect tests of the highly secret F-117 stealth fighter.
Ah, the Nighthawk.
That's the one. The thinking was, if locals, or, maybe spies, saw something strange in the sky near the base.
They think aliens.
Precisely. Rather than correctly guessing it was a top-secret U.S. aircraft project, it was a very intentional distraction.
That's pretty stunning. A deliberate government psyop using fake UFO photos.
Seems like it. Then there's another case, the 1967 nuclear bunker incident.
Okay, what happened there?
This was reported by a former Air Force captain, Robert Salas. He described seeing a glowing reddish-orange oval hovering over a missile site gate.
Over a nuclear missile site?
Yes. And just after that sighting, 10 nuclear missiles suddenly became disabled, went offline.
Whoa. Okay, that sounds exactly like a movie plot. Aliens shutting down nukes.
It does. And Salas and the others involved were immediately ordered never ever to speak about it. Height of the Cold War, you can imagine.
So the cover-up was immediate.
Instantaneous. But the ARO investigation, according to these sources, found a terrestrial explanation.
Not aliens.
Apparently not. The Air Force, it turns out, was testing an electromagnetic generator.
Okay.
It was designed to simulate a nuclear pulse, an EMP, to see how vulnerable the missile systems were to that kind of attack.
Ah, testing their own defenses.
Exactly. And this device, when placed high up, would collect energy, it would glow orange.
The reddish-orange oval Salas saw.
Plausibly, yes. And then it would send a powerful pulse down cables connected to the missiles, disabling them as part of the test.
So the test worked, but they didn't tell the witnesses.
Right. Witnesses like Salas weren't told the truth. And the sources suggest they were kept in the dark not to hide aliens,
But to hide.
to prevent the Soviet Union from ever learning about this critical EMP vulnerability in the U.S. nuclear arsenal. That was the real secret.
That makes a certain cold, hard kind of sense.
Yeah.
But Salas, he still believes it was aliens.
He does. He still believes it was intergalactic intervention and a cover-up. And you could argue he's absolutely right about the cover-up part.
Just not the alien part.
According to this investigation, yes. It's understandable why he'd believe it, given what he saw and what he was told, or rather not told.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's two examples. What else did they find?
Well, Perhaps the most bizarre example uncovered is what the sources call the Yankee Blue hazing ritual.
Yankee Blue. Hazing ritual. What on earth is that?
It sounds wild. Apparently for decades.
Like AIDS.
Yeah, for decades, new commanders being brought into highly classified Air Force programs, these are known as Special Access Programs, or SAPs.
Super secret stuff.
Top level. As part of their indoctrination, they were shown a photo of a flying saucer. It was described as an anti-gravity maneuvering vehicle.
Seriously, they showed them a picture of a saucer.
And they were told this was part of a secret reverse engineering effort happening within their specific program. They even used a real program name, Yankee Blue, just for this ruse.
So they were pretending one of their own secret programs was actually reverse engineering alien tech.
That's what the sources indicate, yes. And they were sworn to extreme secrecy about it.
Of course.
And incredibly, the sources say many of these officers never learned it wasn't real. They went through their careers believing this was actually happening.
That is unbelievable. How many people are we talking about?
The practice went on for decades, apparently affecting hundreds of people. It only stopped when a memo finally ordered it halted in the spring of 2023.
Just last year.
Seems so. And Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, she was reportedly stunned when she found out.
I bet she was.
Yeah, noting it had involved hundreds and hundreds of people who genuinely believed they were being briefed into a secret alien reverse engineering program run by the U.S. Air Force.
And it was all a prank, a test. What was the point?
The sources call it a hazing ritual, maybe a way to test loyalty or secrecy. It's not entirely clear why it persisted for so long.
But it adds another layer of deception.
A huge layer. And adding even more secrecy on top. The sources report the Air Force actually asked the ARO investigators to try and keep this specific finding.
The Yankee Blue ritual.
Yes. Keep the multi-decade, widespread deception of its own senior officers. Keep that out of the initial public ARO report.
They wanted to bury it even after it was uncovered.
That's what's reported. That impulse to keep secrets, even secrets about internal deception, seems incredibly deeply ingrained.
Wow. These specific examples, they really paint a picture, don't they? They highlight this broader point discussed in the sources, the sheer scale and opacity of the national security state.
It's described as a gargantuan and decentralized labyrinth.
Protected by concentric circles of secrecy, makes it hard for anyone, inside or out, to know the full picture.
And we've seen echoes of this before, right? This isn't totally new. The CIA itself admitted back in 1997
Oh yeah, I remember this.
that they used UFO lore, the whole mythology, to distract from their own secret projects.
Like the U-2 spy plane.
Exactly, which was indeed developed and tested at Area 51. So, using UFOs as cover isn't unprecedented.
And the sources also touch on other potential terrestrial explanations for sightings, things that are maybe known or theorized to exist.
Right. Besides things like stealth planes, there's speculation about hypothetical advanced aircraft designs, sometimes called TR-3A or TR-3B, though their existence is unconfirmed.
Black projects.
Potentially. And also technologies designed specifically to confuse or spoof enemy radar systems.
Electronic warfare stuff?
Yeah. They mention experts like Ravaraj Av discussing radar spoofing, and the Navy's Nemesis program, which can apparently create viable false targets on radar screens.
So making pilots or radar operators think they see something that isn't physically there.
That's the capability. These kinds of technologies definitely add to the pool of potential misidentifications for UAP sightings.
It really complicates the picture.
It does. And then you have figures like Christopher Mellon. He's interesting because he's a former high-ranking defense official.
He had oversight of these SAPs, these special access programs, right?
Yes. And he became a vocal advocate for more transparency about UAPs, specifically because of unexplained sightings reported by credible military pilots.
He was inside the system, saw the secrecy, but thought something real was being missed or ignored.
That seems to be his position. He even claims he was directly involved in leaking that now famous 2017 New York Times story.
The one with the Nimitz Tic Tac video.
That's the one. He says he helped leak it specifically to force the issue into the public discussion, to get Congress and the Pentagon to take it seriously.
That's quite a move for a former insider.
It is. And Mellon offers this really interesting perspective on how being deep inside that secret world changes your view.
What does he say?
He's quoted saying that once you're deep inside, you start to read the newspapers differently. And you realize different actors are pulling different strings. It paints this picture of a world where information, or the lack of it, is a fundamental tool, a form of power.
Yeah, that reminds me of that quote. Is J. Edgar Hoover, There's something addicting about a secret.
That fits perfectly. When secrecy becomes the absolute norm, maybe even an addiction, it can be incredibly hard to pull back from it, even when it might be necessary.
Which leads us back to a powerful point made by Pilkington, the Mirage Men author.
Right.
And it seems kind of validated by these new ARO findings about deliberate deception.
That once these myths, this whole mythology about alien cover-ups, are set in motion,
Especially when the government itself gives them a nudge or maybe a big push.
they can take on a life of their own. They become self-perpetuating. And they remain, as Pilkington puts it, a useful cover. Maybe even useful long after the original secret needed protecting.
And, perhaps ironically, the sources suggest that the lack of full transparency, even in the official reports trying to debunk things,
Like the fact that ARO investigators reportedly had to push to get details about these disinformation incidents included.
right, that very lack of openness can actually end up fueling more conspiracy theories.
Exactly, because it gives the impression that things are still being withheld. Even if what's being withheld now is just evidence of past government deception, not aliens, it feeds the doubt.
It's a feedback loop of secrecy and suspicion.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
And the sources suggest a final, almost poetic twist here,
Which is?
that the very paranoid mythology the U.S. military helped spread now has a hold over a growing number of its own senior officials who count themselves as believers.
Wait, so the people inside the system start believing the cover story?
That's the suggestion. The cover story, maybe started decades ago for specific reasons, has become the genuine belief for some people within the very system that created or fostered it. The myth took root internally.
That is wild. The snake eating its own tail.
In a way, yeah. So, thinking about all this history, the deliberate disinformation, the intense secrecy, the potential for internal belief in the myth, what does all of this mean for you, listening to this deep dive today?
Well, it really highlights a fundamental challenge we all face, doesn't it, in navigating information today.
How do you know what to trust?
Exactly. Especially when some potential sources of information, in this case, parts of the government, have a proven, even admitted history of actively manipulating or withholding information.
Even if their stated reasons, back then were initially tied to legitimate national security concerns like protecting stealth tech or nuclear vulnerabilities, the legacy of that secrecy lingers.
It demonstrates just how difficult it is to get a clear, reliable picture in the world sometimes. Information can be, and historically has been, deliberately shaped or hidden.
Creating these complex, really long-lasting mythologies in the process, myths that become incredibly hard to unravel or disprove definitively.
So, bringing it all back to where we started, while the recent official reports might deny alien encounters, deny secret alien technology programs,
These sources we've looked at, they laid out compelling evidence that the U.S. government actively played a significant, decades-long role in creating and maintaining the UFO mythology itself.
and they did this primarily to conceal its own very real, very secret terrestrial programs and vulnerabilities.
Not, according to these sources anyway, to hide crashed saucers from Roswell or captured aliens in Area 51. The secrets were more earthly, but still highly sensitive.
So while the ultimate truth about specific unexplained sightings, the really puzzling ones that remains a subject of intense debate, absolutely.
Of course, these reports don't explain everything away.
But these sources make a powerful case that the widespread and enduring belief in a government cover-up about UFOs is, quite ironically, partly a direct and maybe even intended result of the government's own actions of deliberate deception and intense secrecy over many years.
The belief in a cover-up is real, in part because there was a cover-up, just maybe not about what people thought.
Exactly.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Okay.
If the government, or parts of it, actively cultivated complex, long-lasting myths decades ago to hide its secrets, what other widely held beliefs today might have similar, surprising origins, maybe rooted in deliberate obfuscation, rather than the simple, commonly accepted explanations we hear?
Something to think about.
Yeah,
How much of what we think we know is shaped by forces we don't see?
it's a challenging question.